Hi, everyone. Welcome in. I'm going to give people a couple minutes just to kind of get settled and we'll get started with today's webinar. We still have a ton of people getting in, so I'm just going to let them get their mics going or cameras turned off, all that good stuff. We are muting everyone, so if you do have a question, please keep it to the end. We're going to be doing Q&A then. That number is still growing, so I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes. Alrighty. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Travel Goods Association webinar. We're honored to welcome Nate Herman, the Senior Vice President of Policy at the American Apparel and Footwear Association, or the AAFA. Nate is an expert in trade policy, PFAS compliance, corporate social responsibility, and he's here today to help us unpack a topic that's having a major impact across our entire industry, tariffs. With so many of our members feeling the effects of these policies, this conversation could not come at a more critical time. These tariffs are affecting pricing, supply chain, and long-term planning for companies across the board. And we know how important it is to keep you guys informed as the situation continues to evolve. In today's webinar, Nate's going to walk us through the current state of tariffs, the real-world impact on the travel goods industry, how companies are navigating these challenges, what the TGA and the AAFA are doing to advocate for you, and what to expect moving forward. This situation is, or the session, excuse me, is being recorded and it will be posted on the TGA Hub as well as our YouTube channel. That's at TGA Talks. So if you want to revisit the content or share it with your team, it is going to be available soon. We also encourage everyone to join the government regulations group on the Hub to stay up to date with information on this topic. The slide deck will be available in this group to all TGA members following the session, so make sure to check this out if you are a member. And if you do have questions about becoming a member, please make sure you reach out to us and we can get you guys set up. So please please join me in welcoming today's speaker, Nate Herman.
Thank you very much, Judy. Thanks to Josh and everyone at TGA for having me on today. I'm going to stop my video so I have enough bandwidth to show you the slides here. A lot going on. It's a very fluid situation that we're in right now. And so I'll try and give you the update as it is from about an hour ago and see. And just to note that everything I'm saying could change 20 minutes after we're done. So that's how fluid the situation is. So as Judy described, sort of the agenda for today is just giving you a baseline where the industry was before all this tariff stuff started, the current state of play with the tariffs, how the industry and companies are responding, how TGA is responding, and what happens next. That'll be a lot of question marks, but we'll get into that a little bit. And then, as Judy mentioned, we'll take all the questions at the end. So if you have questions, you don't want to forget them, write them in the chat, and we'll go address all those questions at the end. So state of the industry, where are we now? So I just want to give you a little overview of sort of the industry. Many of you know parts of this, you're living and breathing it, but I just want to sort of set a baseline here for our presentation today. So 98% of all travel goods sold in the United States today are imported. Most of you know that. There is a little bit of manufacturing still in the States, but most of it is not here anymore. And so we actually, as an industry, are the highest tariffed industry in the United States. So this is before the Trump tariffs, or before this round of Trump tariffs, because everybody knows we have the Section 301 China tariffs from Trump's first term. But right now, travel goods imports are paying 5 times the tariff rates that all other products coming in the United States are paying. And just to give you some context, if you combine travel goods with clothes and shoes, from a values basis, we're about 5% of total US imports. And we paid over a quarter of all tariffs to the US government in 2024. And as you know, the normal tariff rates on travel goods, depending if they're textile or hard-sided, are 17.6 to 20%. So just again, setting the baseline for everyone here, China is still the #1 supplier to the US market, significantly down from where we were just less than 10 years ago. We're still at almost half of all the travel goods market is supplied by China. Again, that number in 2016 was much, much higher. There's been a concerted effort by all of you to try and diversify away from China. But even with all those efforts over the last 10 years, we're still at almost half of all travel goods imports. Speaking of that diversification, we're still heavily consolidated. Even if you look at where do we diversify to, Vietnam and China account for almost 3/4 of all US travel goods imports. You add in the other top 5 suppliers, Cambodia, Indonesia, India, and you're at 90%. And then you have the top 10, you have virtually all US travel goods imports. So we're still heavily consolidated. So just to give you an idea of where these travel goods are coming in from, this is in 2024. So again, Cambodia #3, India #4, Indonesia #5, Myanmar major supplier, Philippines, Pakistan, and then it drops precipitously from there. You're talking about Bangladesh at #10 is only 0.7% of total imports. So you can see it's heavily concentrated in the top 2, top 5, and it drops precipitously from there. Okay, so that was the baseline. Now let's get to what is actually going on right now. So what are the tariffs that are in place currently? So there is the 145% tariffs in all US imports from China. So I do want to note that this is not just targeted at travel goods. These tariffs impact all goods. And I'm not even showing everything here. There's separate tariffs on autos and auto parts. There's separate tariffs on Canada and Mexico. There's separate tariffs on steel and aluminum and all derivatives, including imported beer. So, I mean, there's a lot of tariffs going on, but I'm just talking about the ones impacting our industry. But note that they are impacting a lot of industries, not just travel goods. President Trump is not targeting travel goods as part of this. We are the collateral damage of his trade policy right now. So 145% tariffs on all US imports from China. So where did we come up with 145%? This is the 20% that Trump imposed back in February and March, 10% each time, plus the 125% so-called reciprocal tariffs, which are not reciprocal in any way. And again, these tariffs are on top of the current tariffs already being paid. So you put that on top of the 17.6% to 20% normal tariff, on top of the China Section 301 tariffs left over from Trump 1. And you're talking about for hard-sided luggage, the total tariff, if you're importing hard-sided luggage from China right now, is 190%. So you're talking about almost triple the actual price of the hard-sided luggage. But that's not all. There's 10% tariffs on US imports from all other countries. So that means US imports from Vietnam, US imports from Indonesia, Cambodia, Philippines, Thailand, they all have this 10%. So looking at that same hard-sided luggage, what that means is you're paying 20% normal tariff plus this 10% reciprocal tariff for a total of 30% tariff on hard-sided luggage from Vietnam. This 10% even applies to free trade agreements and trade preference programs. So say you decide to move your production to the Dominican Republic, which is part of the US Central America Dominican Republic Free Trade Agreement. Well, it's no longer duty-free from the Dominican Republic, which is the main advantage of sourcing from the Dominican Republic. There's now a 10% tariff even on that. If you're importing from Jordan, 10% tariff now on that, even if you qualify under the free trade agreement. You're bringing in from Africa, still the same thing. You have a 10% tariff now. So it literally applies to everything and all products, not just travel goods. In addition, President Trump did something called a country-specific tariff. So he announced this on April 2nd. April 4th, April 2nd, it was supposed to go into effect on April 9th, did actually go into effect on April 9th. And then he announced, after the stock market tanked, he announced about 8 hours later, a pause on these country-specific tariffs. But this pause is just a 90-day pause. It's not a permanent removal of these country-specific tariffs. And so this is something you very much need to keep in mind. And so looking at our big suppliers, you're talking about 46% specific tariff on Vietnam. And then again, this is on top of the normal tariff, 49% on Cambodia. You have, for some reason, I forgot to list Thailand here, I apologize. But you have 32% on Indonesia. So you're talking about crazy high tariffs. Not as crazy as the China tariffs, but pretty much making it impossible for you to source from these countries. And so that is still out there. What President Trump proposed when he imposed this pause was to negotiate trade deals with all these countries. So right now, the Trump administration is in the process of trying to negotiate some sort of trade deal, what he's calling economic prosperity deals, with over 90 countries. And he wants to have this all done, again, within 90 days. And so let's talk about where some of those negotiations are right now. China being the biggest one, and I'll talk about that. Well, I'll talk about that now. There's no negotiations going on right now, but President Trump, in reaction to what the markets were doing last week and on Monday this week, started to make gestures publicly that those 145% tariffs might not stay in place if China comes to the negotiating table. But as of now, and according to some statements by the Trump administration, at least for the next few weeks, that 145% is going to remain in place. That might change, but it's unclear what that would change to. Would that change all the way back to that original 20%, or will it change to half of 145%, so 70% or 75%? Still prohibitive, which you're talking about once you add in all the other tariffs, basically double the price you're paying for the product. But right now, there are no negotiations right now between the U.S. and China. A lot of rhetoric, but President Trump seems to be, some people have said he's starting to fold. Obviously, when people say that, he doesn't respond well, but he seems to be trying to find a way out of the 145% tariffs. So we'll have to see what happens there. That is part of the issue with these tariffs, is that they're extremely unpredictable. There's no way to plan around them because President Trump used authority that is under dispute. Actually, there's about a dozen legal cases against the tariffs at this point. But he can change them at any moment, and he has changed them at any moment, as we discussed. So it's hard to plan here. So the China tariffs could be at 145% for another 5 days, another 5 weeks, another 5 months, or permanent. I have no idea. And I have no idea what would replace it. Only President Trump seems to know at this point what he plans to do, and I don't think he even knows what he wants to do. Vietnam. Vietnam has been in to meet with the Trump administration a number of times. In fact, the latest meeting was yesterday with the U.S. Trade Representative. The meeting went well, but no progress. There was early rumors that Vietnam was going to be the first country to have this trade deal with the United States, but that is seemed to be pushed on the back burner at this point. Not on the back burner, but it's not nearly as close to finished as people predicted. Vietnam is offering to buy a number of U.S. products to eliminate its tariffs on things like automobiles, but it's unclear if that's enough and what tariff that'll get Vietnam in the end of the day. There are conversations about a week ago where Vietnam was saying their target was to get a tariff rate around 25%. But we don't know if that's where that is. Cambodia is negotiating. They had an initial visit about a week and a half ago. They're still in conversations, but they're further behind the Vietnam. I would say Vietnam, out of the countries that supply our industry, is the furthest along right now. There are other countries like the European Union or Japan or South Korea or the United Kingdom that are also well along, but they're not. But again, no deal has been struck at this point, and we're already 3 weeks after this initial announcement. So Indonesia, they are in town in Washington, D.C. this week, meeting with various officials, trying to negotiate. India, Vice President Vance was in India through yesterday. Sounds like they made an agreement for the structure of an agreement, but they made a big announcement about this agreement to discuss an agreement. So you can see nothing is really close to the finish line yet. And so as we get closer, and as the U.S. government is trying to negotiate 90 different deals here, we'll have to see what happens. Thailand, they are expected to be in town next week and start those discussions as well. So the discussions are happening. If you believe some of the press about the negotiations with the European Union, nobody's actually clear on what the Trump administration wants. They're making offers. They don't know if this is what the Trump administration wants. And everybody's trying to figure that out right now. And I'm not sure the Trump administration knows exactly what it wants. But it wants to get rid of the trade imbalance. But that's unclear how you go about doing that. So to add to all that fun, the Trump administration announced last week a new tariff on Chinese-built ships entering, calling at ports in the United States. And these numbers, this has gotten sort of pushed out of the news, but something you definitely need to be paying attention to because these numbers are crazy big in terms of the cost for a Chinese-built ship. So just to put it in perspective, about 55% of the ships entering the United States are Chinese-built. And then, of course, you have Chinese vessel operators like COSCO and OOCL that are bringing in ships. So this is what the fees that were announced last week. So you're talking about $50 per net ton on a ship coming from a China vessel operator. So you're talking about a 15,000 TEU ship. You're talking, about $4.5 million per ship coming into the United States. And obviously, Costco and OOCL are going to pass on those costs to you, the container owners. So you are going to have to pay these costs. Even if it's just a Chinese-built vessel, they came up with this crazy formula per net ton or per container. And so we just broke it out for a 15,000 TEU ship. The average net tonnage is about 150,000 to 200,000 net tons. So you're talking about by net tonnage, you're talking about starting in October, these ships will be charged a fee of $2.7 million. And so again, that cost is going to be passed on. You're talking a lot of money per container here that's going to be passed on to you. And these numbers are going to go up. They're going to go up every year through 2028. And so those numbers are just going to increase. The only exceptions to this new rule are that for very small ships or trips that are shorter than 2,000 nautical miles. So the regions that would benefit would be Central America, the Caribbean, like the Dominican Republic, and most of South America. Those are the only places that would fall within that 2,000 nautical mile range. Anything from Asia, anything from Europe or the Middle East or Africa would not fall in that 2,000 nautical mile range. So pretty much 95% of, probably 98% of what we bring in currently would be covered by these fees. But again, that's not all. When they made this announcement last week, when the U.S. Trade Representative made this announcement last week, they also proposed tariffs on China-built cranes, China-built chassis, and China-built containers. And you can see the number on the screen. China controls 95% of the production of containers and 80% of the production of chassis, which means likely the chassis that's moving your container is Chinese built, and the container that houses your product was Chinese built. And so you're going to be facing tariffs on that. Those tariffs are going to the ocean carriers, but well, obviously then ocean carriers will turn around and charge you plus a nice little up fee on that. So some more tariffs coming. In fact, just yesterday, the U.S. Commerce Department announced an investigation that will lead to tariffs on Chinese-built trucks. So we're going to see additional tariffs all over the place here. So not a great picture, but that's where we are right now. So I just wanted to give you sort of a perspective on this before we move into how the industry and TGA are reacting. So if you look at the chart here, and I know it's a little confusing, in 2024, our industry paid a total of $1.6 billion in tariffs. And that included the Section 301 tariffs and everything else. We paid $1.6 billion in tariffs, a crazy high number for an industry where virtually nothing is made in the United States. I'll give you that. So what would, if we were talking about based on 2024 volumes, what would be the additional duties on that we would be paying under the Trump tariffs? So this is in addition to that 1.6 billion. We would be, if we brought in product at the same volume from the same countries that we did in 2024, we would be paying an additional $4.14 billion. So just to talk about that, these tariffs are just crazy, and in many cases, as we discuss in a moment, basically it's not where you're just going to raise prices, you just can't bring in the products at all. Okay, so what has been the industry and TGA response on this? So, what we're seeing are a few things, and this is the initial response that we've heard from members so far. This will change as we learn more, again, or as these tariffs stick or don't stick, as the case may be. But this is what we're seeing right now. So we're seeing people basically not allowing orders from China to leave China. They're saying stop them there. In some cases, they're canceling contracts. In some cases, they're just saying hold the product there. This is a temporary measure and only dealing with current orders. And I think the idea here is people are waiting to see if Trump changes his mind and lowers the duties to a point where the companies can afford to bring the product in. So that's one of the responses. The other is we're getting a lot of questions about, well, what if we bring a bunch of materials into a bunch of Chinese materials from other countries into a third country? What would confer origin in that product? So if we wanted to bring a bunch of stuff into Cambodia or Vietnam from China, what we would have to do so that now the country of origin is Vietnam or Cambodia versus China. And so basically the bottom line, the actual rule is a little more detailed, but I wanted to simplify it for you. Is the bottom line is you want to substantially transform the product. Basically, it wasn't a suitcase, or it wasn't a handbag, or it wasn't a duffel bag before it came into the country, and it became a piece of luggage or a handbag or a duffel bag in the country. So the idea is basically, if you look at the harmonized tariff schedule, you're looking at bringing in materials that were not part of HGS heading 4202, which is where all travel goods are. And it became HGS heading 4202 in that country. So you could bring in the wheels, the zippers, the textile, the fabric. You can bring in all the pieces, but not actually have it formed into a piece of luggage, and then put all those together in a country, and then that country would be the country of origin. So we're getting a lot of questions on that. And so people have been asking about that. Essentially, these are essentially the same rules that would have qualified you for generalized system of preferences or GSP when that was in place. A little bit easier because it doesn't have the 35% value added, but basically it's the same rules as you have for GSP. So for those of you who went into Myanmar or Cambodia or Indonesia or Thailand under GSP, those same rules would work to get that country of origin under the substantial transformation. So a few other things I'll just mention here quickly. People are trying to accelerate orders. So basically, we've been told by U.S. Customs that in order to beat the end of the pause, is you have to enter a product in by July 9th at 12:01 a.m. You have to enter it into U.S. Customs by that time. Otherwise, then the pause is lifted and those country-specific tariffs go into place. So we've seen people trying to accelerate orders. The next bullet here is sort of the same idea as the first bullet, is that people are bringing the shipments from China and other countries into Canada instead of the U.S. and holding the product in bonded warehouses with the hope that the tariffs will change and then they can bring it in. But the idea of having it in Canada is that you can bring it in very quickly in case President Trump changes his mind again. And you're beating that because obviously from China, it takes weeks, where from Canada, it takes days, if not hours, to bring in a product. And then the last thing we're hearing people doing is trying to convince the industries in the countries they're sourcing from, to convince the governments in those countries to negotiate with the Trump administration. And so that's what we've been hearing so far. I'm sure other people are doing things. We'd love to hear about that, but this is what we're hearing so far. Also, we're talking a lot to the press. We're working with the American Apparel and Footwear Association and talking a lot to the press. And what the press really wants to hear from are companies and their personal experience. And they particularly want to hear from smaller companies, which most of you would qualify as. We've had companies talk to all these press outlets. Would love to have more companies be willing to talk to those press outlets, so you can reach out to me if you're interested. But we are raising the issue in the press and the impact that there's going to raise prices, lead to shortage of product. We've been hammering that home repeatedly. You can also use the legislative action submitted through our partner, the American Apparel and Footwear Association, to urge Congress to get engaged. Congress is finally starting to make noises that, hey, maybe, under the Constitution, we're supposed to have the power over tariffs, not the president. And maybe what President Trump did, we should have some oversight over and maybe say it's not a good idea. Even some Republicans are starting to say that now. Particularly in the Senate, you're starting to see resolutions that are being proposed. There's going to be another one voted on next week. But if you want to weigh in with your member of Congress or your senator, this is the place to do it. And you can craft a note to say what you wanted to say and go from there. But in addition to that, we are working with the American Apparel and Footwear Association on a company letter to President Trump. We have over 115 companies signed on to date. That letter will be shared by Judy and Kat after this this webinar with all of you. It'll be they'll talk about that at the end, but where it'll be found. But you can fill out a simple survey monkey and sign on to this letter. This is sort of the first half of the letter. I couldn't fit the rest on the screen, but you get an idea. Basically saying we're asking President Trump to exclude chapters 42, basically clothes, shoes, and travel goods. And trying to explain why, trying to use the language of the America First language that is being used right now by the Trump administration. And so it would be great if TGA members signed on to this letter. So that gets me to my last slide before we move to questions, and is basically what happens next. That is well, in our case, the $4.14 billion question that we're facing right now. This really is up to President Trump, and as President Trump has demonstrated, he can change his mind very quickly. And so we're not sure. We know that President Trump is looking to announce a deal as soon as possible. I do not think it'll be a deal with one of the countries we care about. It'll likely be with the UK or with Japan. But he is looking for deals, and he's looking for lack of a better term, face-saving measures to say that he won some concessions that will balance trade with various countries. We are talking to the Vietnamese, we're talking to the Cambodians, the Bangladeshis, the Indonesians. We have not talked personally with the Thai government yet, but we are trying to talk to all these governments to try and encourage them to make offers, to make concessions. So we're trying to push on our end to try and get these countries to negotiate. But I think that's the biggest thing. If they can give President Trump a way to save face and declare victory, that's what we're looking for. Having said that, I think we are living in a world where we're going to face some additional tariffs no matter what. Even if Vietnam is able to strike a deal, yes, they won't be paying the 46% tariff, but they might be still paying a 10, 15, 20% tariff. So I think even in best case scenario, we're still going to be facing additional tariffs. The only exception to that, what we're hoping is that with the free trade agreements, that we might go back to things that qualify under the free trade agreements, don't have to pay any additional tariffs. But that's still a long shot. And again, in our industry, that's really, we're talking about the Dominican Republic. That would be the beneficiary, in Jordan and Egypt to a much lesser degree. But that's sort of where we are right now. We are pressing Congress to engage and take ownership, since again, the Section 1, Article 8 of the Constitution clearly states that Congress is supposed to be managing tariffs, not the president. So we're working those angles too, but those aren't going to be short-term solutions. And so you need to be looking at your sourcing situation. You need to not make any rash decisions, because again, things can change on a dime here. but you do need to be taking decisions, making decisions that can prepare you and prepare your customers for what comes next. So I'll stop there and turn over to Judy and Kat to manage the questions, and happy to take any questions you guys may have.
Maybe Judy, before that, if I can jump in, Nate, this is Josh Cross. Thank you, everybody, for jumping on this webinar. It's extremely important. If I could just emphasize and add one thing that Nate had mentioned, our industry is impacted tremendously. And as Nate, myself, and a few other members of the TGA have gone to various events held in Washington, D.C., we need more participation. And if you're unable to go to DC and participate in these events, I would just ask for your support and writing letters and reaching out to either Nate, myself directly, and letting us know the impacts that not only these tariffs, but other things that have been happening or are currently happening with your business imposed by what's happening with the tariffs, letting us know, writing us letters. There have been a number of companies that have done so and have made some pretty good headway in the media as well with congressional leaders. And the TGA is certainly trying to do that as well. We have locally, well, I guess they are U.S. senators, have made some impact with our U.S. senators in our state, where they want to meet with us and understand what's happening with their delegates locally, but also on a national level, so that they can lobby on our behalf and help get this conversation going on a wider level with more of their constituents as well as their colleagues in the Senate. So I may be reaching out to you directly, asking for your company's story on how it's impacted the bottom line and what it's doing with your employee retention and other things. This is not information that will be shared openly or publicly. This is confidential in areas that we can use it in these meetings with government officials to show what's really happening in our industry and why it's so critical that they take action, that we take action, because it's really impacting us in a just challenging way. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Judy, and Nate and we want to hear from you. So please do reach out, and just know that this information that you share with us will remain confidential and anonymous. So much as you'll allow us to open it more publicly, we're happy to share that as well. But we'll keep it confidential unless you tell us otherwise.
All right, guys, thanks so much for joining. We are going to go over the Q&As now that are in the chat. Kat and I will kind of go back and forth, and I'm just going to start. I saw Tiffany's, it caught my eye, and we're kind of talking about it now. So I am curious. This one for you, Nate. Is our industry at a disadvantage being grouped with clothing and shoes? Since there are so many who would argue that clothing can be made in the US, are we hurt by that?
Good question, Tiffany. And you've had these conversations in Washington, D.C. And hopefully you can encourage some of your vendors and others to be active in Washington, D.C., since you know what it's like. But no, I don't think it's necessarily bad. We're talking about 98% of what we sell is imported. For clothing, that's 97%. So it's not a whole lot different. And most of the clothes and shoes manufactured here are for the U.S. military, which requires 100% U.S. made products under the law. There are a few exceptions to that, and there's some custom or very high-end clothes and shoes that are made here. But I think we're essentially saying the same story, that there are some manufacturers who are actually hurt by the tariffs, because many of the materials to make those clothes, shoes, and accessories are no longer available in the United States, so they have to import them from countries like China. So now you're actually harming U.S. manufacturing, not helping it. So I don't think it hinders the industry in any way to be thrown into the same grouping as clothes and shoes. I think it helps us amplify our voice. Because we are a small industry, but I think it definitely helps us amplify our voice.
Great. I'm going to start with the first question that was in the chat, Nate. So you might have covered this already. If you did, if you could just kind of briefly summarize it. Nikki with Hideaway said, can you speak to DDP freight forwarding risks, opportunities, and realities from China to US specifically?
Yeah, I mean, DDP would be very difficult right now because that means if you're the importer of record, you're paying all the tariffs. Uh, um, I think that's not necessarily the best solution. Obviously, that's what your customers would want. But in many cases, your customers are much better able to handle the cost of the tariffs if they're a bigger customer, say like TJ Maxx or a Target or Macy's, then you would be able to handle. I mean, again, we're talking about from China. Once you add in all the normal tariffs and the Section 301 tariffs, you're talking about 190% tariff. So you're paying essentially 3 times the cost of the product. I don't know many folks that can do that for very long. So yes, this would help you keep your customers, but you wouldn't be able to do it for more than a month or two before you put yourself in dire financial situation.
All right, we have a question coming in from Travis. He said, we've used the same family factory in China since 1989. The answer you're giving me is brands need to move to a different country for manufacturing. Have we given up on fighting to work with a country that makes some goods better quality and as good labor conditions as the US? And yes, there are labor laws broken in the US.
You make some really great points there, Travis. I wouldn't disagree with you. And I would say if there is a way that you can hold or do some of those options where you hold the product in China or bring it into Canada and sort of hold some of the product there, President Trump can change his mind tomorrow. If you listen to his rhetoric over the last 2 or 3 days, and as the stock market keeps responding positively to his rhetoric about China, I can see him possibly lowering the duties. Is it enough that can make it financially feasible for you to continue sourcing from that supplier? I don't know. But this could change tomorrow, could change later today, could change next week. So it's a really hard decision. It's just what you can handle. But I don't know if anybody can handle 190% tariffs. But if you can try and wait it out, I would say try and wait it out or come up with some short-term solution that still enables you to keep this relationship long-term until the dust settles. I don't know when this dust is going to settle, but that would be my suggestion to you.
This is from Moses. It says, where is the normal or the 20% normal tariff from?
If you look at the harmonized tariff schedule, and this is available on the International Trade Commission website, so usitc.gov, you can pull up the tariff schedule. The normal tariff rates are the column 1 tariff rates. And so if you look at where all our travel goods are, wallets, handbags, duffel bags, backpacks, luggage, they're all in HTS heading 4202, which is under Chapter 42 of the Harmonized Tariff Schedule. And so the duties range, unless you're using leather, the duties on textiles are all around 17.6%, and the duties on hard-sided plastic travel goods are all 20%. Luggage, depending on the type of product, is anywhere from 7 to 10%. But that's where the duties go. That's the normal duty rate. That no matter what country you're sourcing from, you're paying that normal tariff rate. Especially right now with the GSP program that Josh mentioned earlier being expired.
And then George is asking, how about Mexico duty?
So that is a good question right now. I can get into details on that, but right now, if the travel good qualifies under the US Mexico Canada agreement, the USMCA, then it right now can enter the United States temporarily duty free. If it's made in Mexico but does not qualify under USMCA, so it doesn't qualify for the duty free access, then you have an additional 25% tariff. So again, you would pay whatever normal tariff you're paying now plus 25%. So that right now, that's the only exception to this 10% global tariff is that Canada and Mexico, if you bring in products that qualify under the USMCA, the US Mexico Canada agreement, you still have duty free. But that's the only exception right now. If it doesn't qualify, you're paying 25%.
Someone said I have a travel pillow sample that is showing packaging labels, origin made in China, further processed in Cambodia. Which duty will be applied, China or Cambodia?
The reason they would put that on the label is because it became a pillow in China. And so the duty rates for China would apply. This is a situation that if that supplier is using a facility in Cambodia, can that facility that's finishing the pillow do more of the assembly for that pillow, so that instead of getting a finished pillow from China and then finishing it further in Cambodia, can you get the stuffing and the cover separately from that facility in China? So again, this is another way, going back to the question on the China supplier, is there a way to maintain that business in such a way where they're putting together all the materials, but then you're doing the final assembly somewhere else? And that would apply to the pillows as well. Can you add more of the assembly in Cambodia so then it then becomes a pillow in Cambodia, and then you can claim Cambodia origin?
All right, our next question is, if materials are imported in from other countries to make a product in the US, what would the tariffs be for that?
There would be tariffs on the materials coming in. So again, it depends where you're getting the materials from. If the materials from China, you're going to be paying 145% on those materials. But the finished product is not going to have any tariffs because it was assembled in the United States.
Someone said, can you quickly repeat the issue of sending WIP good or finished goods to a country with lower tariff than on the US? Tariffs, I think is what they meant to say.
Yeah, so I think they're talking about if you try and ship a finished good to from China to Cambodia, say, and then you just try and repackage it and bring it into the US and try and claim Cambodia origin, that's something called transshipment. One, it's illegal. So you can be subject to fines and criminal penalties from the US Customs and Border Protection, but they also tend to be able to figure that out. There have been efforts in the past to try and do that, but you really have to do some sort of substantial transformation. That's hence the term, in order to get that Cambodia origin. But it is illegal just to send it somewhere, repackage it, or add a tag, or make some minor modification. That does not confer origin.
All right, next question. Is our industry at a disadvantage being grouped with clothing and shoes? Since there are so many who would argue that clothing can be made in the US. Are we hurt by that?
I think we answered that question.
We hit
already.
that one at the beginning. Sorry, Kat.
Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Interesting, in 1954, there were 497 US luggage manufacturers with total sales of 159 million. In 1977, 239 US luggage manufacturers with total sales of 744 million. In 50 plus years, 98% of luggage made outside of the USA. Wow. Okay, so maybe not a question there.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of questions on that. Now, I just want to put into the context there that, again, even the normal tariffs, that 17.6 to 20% are some of the highest tariffs in the US tariff schedule. Those have been in place since the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. Just for those of you, history lesson, and a lot of people are comparing the Trump tariffs to that. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, many people believe, was the cause or one of the primary causes of the Great Depression. Something I don't think we would want to emulate recreate in any way here. And if anyone, I'm showing my age here, but if anybody knows the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, there was a lot of talk about the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. But yes, that created the tariff rates, the normal tariff rates that we have today on our industry. They haven't changed one iota since. In addition to those tariff rates, we actually had quotas on imports from most countries. Those quotas did not go away until 2005 on our industry. So despite having the highest tariff rates of anything coming into the United States and quantity quotas from most countries, including China, up through 2005, most of the domestic manufacturing went away. So just want to note that the solution to keeping US manufacturing and travel goods was not tariffs, was not quotas. Those didn't work. So I did want to note that. If there's other efforts to do that, there are ways to try and encourage US manufacturing. Tariffs and quotas are not the solution. And our history and those numbers that you just read prove that.
I've got a couple direct messages coming in asking if this is being recorded. It is, and it will be made available after probably sometime tomorrow once we get things all settled, as well as the presentation will be available on the hub for TGA members. So make sure that you are updating all of that, and we'll let you know as soon as we have this recording available. Like I said, it'll be on the hub as well as our YouTube channel to really make sure that you guys can get this out to whoever needs to hear it. Josh, I see you're unmuted. I'm sure you have something to say quickly.
No, I was just going to respond to the most recent question that popped in about the association beginning or thinking to develop a network or list of potential U.S. manufacturing companies, or at least companies with certain capabilities that could be tailored to travel goods. Yes, we are on the hub. For those who are TGA members who have access on the hub, that information is currently available. And I'll just make one note to that. A lot of companies that are developing and producing currently in the travel space, producing bags, luggage, are currently tied up with a lot of government contracts, and their bandwidth is very, very narrow on what they can do outside of what they currently have. So we do have that information aggregated. We're looking at expanding it, and we're always updating it. So as you do go on the hub and look for companies to do business with, manufacturing suppliers, everything that is in line with our business, that is an ongoing process that the hub has information, contact information about and for that is there for the TGA members. So if there is any discrepancy or errors, just know that it's an ongoing process to fix that, make sure it's as up to date as possible. But to answer your question, yes, we are. And we'll bring that information out and updates and news briefs as more information is available for the industry.
Yeah, thank you for that, Josh. I see a question. It says our backpacks are included within travel goods HTC.
Yes, the travel goods are included in the HTS heading 4202. Yes.
And we have another question. Would it be best to manufacture from South America?
That is a possibility if you can find somebody that has the capability to do your product. Yeah, the Central and South America have the lowest tariff rates right now, that 10%, plus the normal tariff rates. So if you can find the capability there, yes, that is something to consider. And you have the short travel distances to the United States, so you can be more responsive to customer needs, because it will take 4 or 5 days on a boat versus 3 weeks or longer on a boat to get product in to the US. And you can avoid that Chinese ship tariff too, which then will make shipping your product from the Central America or South America cheaper than it would be from Asia.
If I may have the concluding question, as we come to the top of the hour, Nate, this is kind of a question for both you and I. What would you say for our industry and the people on this call and the brands that we represent would be the best plan of action to get this is a long game. We know that this is not an easy, quick fix, especially with not knowing where the Trump administration is taking things. So if you were to create a list of action items that we can take right now to have as little of disruption and impact on our business, what would you say that would be?
That's a very good question, and not as easy of an answer, Josh. So I think there's sort of two paths I would say here. So the one is raising the alarm bells that this is, an event. This is a catastrophic event for the industry, and so as Josh mentioned, reaching out to your members of Congress, I think, is extremely important. If you have contacts in the Trump administration, in the U.S. Department of Commerce, in the U.S. Trade Representative, U.S. Treasury Department, at the White House, we need to use those contacts and raise this with as many people in the Trump administration as possible, preferably people that are close to President Trump, but anybody at this point. And we need to be talking about this in the press and raising bloody hell in the press that this is not an event that's just going to raise prices by crazy amounts for consumers for things that they need to carry their school books and everything every day. It's going to also be a sort of an event that could put your business out of business because you just can't afford to bring in this product anymore. And I think that's one side of it. That you need to deal with. Two, I think you need to be having conversations with your customers now, and these customers are hearing this from everyone, so they shouldn't be surprised that you're bringing this up. That there are going to be price increases, and that you know that's going to impact demand, but that you need to be trying to work together with your customers to find the best path forward. That if you are able to bring in stuff, are they willing to take 20, 30, 40% price increases? China is again a whole separate animal here, but can they do that? And so I think that's something to bring up and have those conversations as well. And then just trying to figure out a strategy that you're comfortable with. If you are 100% sourcing from China, are there ways that you can maintain those relationships in case President Trump changes his mind on China at some point, but make it so that you can still bring in stuff? Can you, again, work with your supplier so that instead of finishing the product, they're going to ship all the materials to another supplier in another country like Cambodia or Vietnam or elsewhere for final assembly, so you can get that country of origin and still maintain that relationship with your long-standing Chinese suppliers. Maybe they have some ideas. Almost all the investment in the industry in Cambodia is Chinese-based investment. So if I could, I'd probably place bets that your Chinese supplier knows somebody in Cambodia who could do that final assembly, or knows somebody who does know someone who can do that final assembly. And then I would think that longer term, you need to really be trying to diversify. And the industry has been working really hard on that. I mean, talking about the amount we're sourcing from China has dropped by half over the last 10 years. That's amazing. But when you're still so exposed to China, I think the handwriting's on the wall here that need to go elsewhere. I don't know where is safe right now, but anywhere versus China is probably going to be better at this point. And I know that's hard. Some things are only made in China, or they're the only ones who have the technology to make what is being made, but you need to be looking at options there. And again, still getting the materials from China, but making it in a third country or finally assembling in a third country. Those are some of the options you can look at.
Thank you, and we'll aggregate a list and send that out. So if we do reach out on the short-term action items, please participate and help us out so that we can hopefully minimize the impact. If not minimize, then have the discussion with congressional leaders so that they can relay the impact and what it's doing for our economy and our industry to help ease the burden as much as we can. So please participate. I know that we've got a few more questions. I don't know if you have time, Nate, real quickly to answer a few. So Judy, if you want to take those, and then we will conclude within 5 minutes. Does that work?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give about one or two more, and then we're gonna keep this conversation going on the hub. So the more questions you have, we'll make sure that Nate's getting them, and we'll answer those as we kind of move along there. Tom Nebling said, if you bring goods from China to Canada and then into the US, are you still subject to the China-USA tariff when it's brought in?
Yes. Yes. Short answer is yes.
Great. Let's see. Do you see the Chinese government subsidizing their suppliers?
There were efforts with the Section 301 tariffs that the Chinese government did some things. There's a lot of talk about the Chinese currency being devalued. I think we'll see some of that kind of make up for 145%. Most likely not. But China, when it was just 20%, China was making efforts and making sounds like they were going to do some efforts to help the industry eat some of those costs. But again, when you're talking about 145%, I don't know how you do that exactly. But yes, I think there are some efforts to minimize as much as they can.
Kennedy said the travel lock exclusion from the 2018 tariffs is now hurting us as they fall under the 145% versus metal. Do you know any other classifications to help lower the tariff?
No, because this covers everything from China. There's no exclusions right now, except for if you're making iPhones or laptops or semiconductors. Those are the only people who have gotten exceptions so far. So if you can somehow qualify the travel lock as some sort of semiconductor or part of a laptop, you're not going to be able to get an exception. And there's right now no clear vision. That's what the letter is that I showed everyone. That is the letter basically asking for some sort of exclusion for our industry. Right now, there is not one.
Final question I'm going to take, and then we'll wrap things up. This one's from Laurent. So what would it take for luggage manufacturing to come back to the US and be competitive with offshore factories, realistically, both in time and money?
So I think there would have to be a concerted effort by folks to help get some of those factories off the ground. So, sort of, 5-10 companies coming together, guaranteeing a certain volume to a manufacturer. And then, so that's the immediate part. Other parts are there's no vocational training left in the United States. So there's nobody who's trained to work in factories. And so you would have to convince the Trump administration, as they're dismantling the U.S. Department of Education, to increase vocational training, because for those manufacturers that are here, that's a huge cost right now. And because they're having to have workers that are not being productive at all for 6 to 9 months to train them before they can even start producing product. You need to allow legal immigration and not do this crackdown on immigration that we're seeing currently, because most of the current industry is about a third of the current industry manufacturing in the United States is from legal immigrants, not illegal, legal immigrants. And that's being hurt right now. You're looking at any factories that are still in the United States. Most of their workers, the average age is probably in the 50s because they just can't recruit new workers, and you're taking away immigrants. And so that's a big problem as well. So I think it's those sort of combination of issues right now, is they need people to pull money, guarantee volumes for at least a 5-year period. That's really the key to getting manufacturing off.
Great. Thank you so much, Nate. I know you shared a ton of information with us this last hour. To everyone who joined us today, thank you for being a part of this conversation. As Nate mentioned, staying informed and connected is the key to watching these policies as they continue to shift. The session is recorded. It was recorded. It's going to be available to you soon on the TGA Hub, as well as our YouTube page. That's at TGA Talks. We will let everybody know as soon as that's ready. Be sure to join that government regulations group on the Hub to access other resources. As if you're a TGA member, you're going to be getting the slide deck available, and it will be there. If you have any questions following up or need more feedback, please feel free to post them on the Hub. This is a place to continue this conversation, and we'll make sure that we get you as much information in a timely fashion as possible. But thanks again, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.